Like Monica says, I did a PhD in co-tutel between Sorbonne University and James Cook University in Australia. And most of my research is focused on nature, identity, and digital technology. So the concept of identity is very important. So now I'm going to read from the script. So in 2022, I got my PhD in environmental sociology, and my PhD thesis title is Connecting to Nature in the Digital Age, a cross-cultural study of pro-environmental individuals in the United States and in Australia. So the PhD thesis focused on how human beings perceive and experience nature in a digital context, and how digital technology can at the same time support our connection to nature or sometimes prevent it. So the reflection I'm going to share with you today in this presentation started with this PhD thesis, but I'm not going to present the PhD in itself and dig into this data. It's just the starting point of my reflection, and I'm going to explain how it evolved to what I'm doing now as a Lane House Fellow at the RCC. So I started my PhD at Sorbonne University with the words of my supervisor in mind, and he told me, what you will find at the end of your PhD is only yourself. So in other words, by conducting research on the human-nature bond in the US and in Australia, and by delving into cultural landscapes that were different from my own background in Europe and France, I wanted to understand how people connect to nature while at the same time they're using digital technology. And I also wanted to understand it for myself, how I personally, how I felt and thought and act toward nature, and what was my relationship with nature, but also what was my relationship with digital technology. So this is how the concept of identity started being important for me. So I moved to Australia, and I spent 4 years there for the PhD. I lived in Cairns, which is a very beautiful place. Nature there is very wild, and there's a lot of nature. And when I arrived there, I was just mind blown by the difference in the omnipresence of wilderness and all that. At the same time, in Australia and where I was in Cairns, you've got a very omnipresent digital culture and highly technological human culture. So there was sort of I wouldn't say a clash between nature and technology, but there was a very deep contrast, which I thought was very fascinating. So the first goal of my research was to ask that basic question: what is nature? If I'm going to talk about it for my PhD, what does nature mean? The idea of nature is at the very core of science. We all have to deal with it, and we all mention the word nature some way or another in our work. And it is at the same time intrinsically linked to human civilization. However, while nature preservation has become a major social concern, the idea of nature remains elusive. Nature is not an easy word, and it's difficult to get a proper definition to it. A lot of researchers have provided some sort of definition, but there isn't a real consensus of what nature means, especially when you start with the basic assumption that we start with a human mind trying to understand nature. So from the beginning, nature is going to be seen and defined and perceived through the filter of our human mind. So from this point on, how can you ever imagine or accept that there would be a separation between nature when you start by internalizing nature to provide a definition and to understand it? If that makes any sense, what I'm saying. Just saying that human and nature are so intertwined that it's very difficult to understand nature without human being part of it. So that was the beginning of my reflection. The debate about the difference between nature and human beings also started with the concept of wilderness. There's a lot of studies that have been done on the concept of wilderness, or more recently about the idea of a balance of nature. But at the root, perception of nature is the belief that there is a separation between human beings and nature. For instance, when I did my PhD, so I investigated how pro-environmental individuals connected with nature while using digital technology. But I studied a very specific group of people who were pro-environmental individuals, meaning that they already had a connection to nature, they were already interested in it. Still, my findings showed that even that kind of people had a representation of nature in which they accepted the belief that human and nature were different things and they were separate. For instance, again, my findings showed that my participants, they would define themselves as being part of nature, but they wouldn't accept that human objects are part of nature. However, human objects are made by humans, so if humans are part of nature, how could their object not be part of nature? So that was that kind of a paradox in the concepts that I had to deal with during the PhD. So the human nature dualism is not a new notion. The Wilderness Act, established by the American Congress in 1964, defined wilderness as an area where the earth and its community of life are untrammeled by man, where man himself is a visitor who does not remain. So that's a clear definition that excludes human beings from nature. And the Wilderness Act reflects the conventional idea of wilderness, in which nature and human are conceptualized as opposite entities. Since the 1990s, the concept of human-nature dualism has been increasingly criticized. For instance, William Cronon, the quote, he wrote in his essay, The Trouble with Wilderness, that if we allow ourselves to believe that nature to be true must also be wild, then our very presence in nature represents its fall. The place where we are is the place where nature is not. So in the last decades, there have been a lot of evolution going on in our ideas around nature, and an evolution going toward a reconciliation, like evolving toward an idea of nature that would be able to include human. So that's also related to the reconciliation ecology, where Michael Rosenweig postulates that nature can, in some contexts, coexist with some degree of human presence and activity, and sometimes such presence can even be good for biodiversity. So in the context of climate change, research on the human-nature relationship rapidly grew, illustrating the necessity to reassess our relationship with nature in order to improve it. By exploring the psychological and emotional dimension of the human-nature bond, researchers started to ask that question: what if we are nature? So instead of digging deep into the human-nature dualism, now we are actually wondering, but what if we as human beings are nature? What if we are really part of nature? So these studies really emphasize the concept of identity in our relation to nature, and how identity is very important to sustain a very healthy dynamic between human and the environment. So a variety of constructs and measures have been developed to assess the human-nature relationship in regard to identity. For instance, these include environmental identity, which is a term coined by Susan Clayton. There's also nature connectedness by Meyer and Franz, emotional affinity toward nature by Elizabeth Coles, or inclusion of nature in self by Paul Wesley Scholz. All these expressions relate to the same concept, which is how human beings can extend their own identity to include nature. For instance, do you feel sad when you see a tree being cut down? Or do you feel angry when you see an animal being mistreated? Or do you feel a very strong desire to be in nature regularly? All these things could be an indication that you have a strong ecological identity. So I summed up all the different expressions relating to the human-nature relationship in regard to identity into the term ecological identity, just to make it easy. So ecological identity is one of the many facets of human identity. American eco-psychologist Susan Clayton defines it as a sense of connection to some part of the non-human natural environment that affects the way in which we perceive and act toward the world, a belief that the environment is important to us and an important part of who we are. So ecological identity is the extent to which you can view yourself as more than yourself. What if your identity didn't stop at the surface of your body and your skin, but what if it could extend beyond your body to include the natural environment? That's what ecological identity means. So several scales have been established to measure that ecological identity. One of these scales is the connectedness to nature scale. So I will leave you a few seconds to read the segments properly if you want to answer them in your head. Usually that scale has 14 items, so I just picked 5 so that you can have an idea of what it looks like. Another scale is the illustrated inclusion of nature in self scale. It's very straightforward. Basically, which of the 7 representation would fit your own perception of your ecological identity. Technically, do you feel that you are part of nature or separate from it? Would be the first one. To what degree would you include nature in your own identity? the last one being there's no difference between you and nature. So ecological identity has three components. The first one is the cognitive component, which refers to how one intellectually understands his relationship with nature and how one thinks about nature. Then there's the affective component, which is one's sense of care for nature and all the emotion that we can have in relation to nature, whether good or bad. For instance, love and empathy, as well as sadness, anger, or eco-anxiety. They're all emotions that illustrate your ecological identity. And there's the behavioral component, which is the action somebody's going to take to protect the environment. The three components of ecological identity are like three pillars who hold the table of your ecological identity. All three are important. It's like a table. If you've got a pillar who's smaller than the others, the table is going to fall, the top is going to fall. So we need all three to sustain a healthy relationship with nature. I would bet that in this room now, we all have a very strong cognitive dimension yet, working and intellectualizing how we understand nature, because we use our mind a lot to understand biodiversity, ecosystems, and everything. But it's very important as well to use your art, emotions, your feelings to connect to nature, and also to act, use your body, go physical, and spend time in nature, but also like example of behavioral or pro-environmental behaviors are, for instance, moderating in energy consumption, composting, eco-activism, and so on. So all three pillars are important. Why? Why is it important to have an ecological identity? I could be a bit dramatic and say that it's very important for the future of the planet. And in a way it's true, because our identity defines our values, our ideas, and eventually our actions. Who you think you are is going to affect directly what you're going to do. So if you think that you are nature, that may affect what you're going to do toward nature. Basically, when we develop a strong ecological identity, we're more likely to care about and act in ways that benefit the environment, because hurting nature would be like hurting ourselves. But we live in a digital world. So how does constant connectivity and all the screen time that we get in a day, how does it impact our ecological identity? Could it help it, or would it prevent it and hinder it? We need to remember that ecological identity has three pillars: cognitive, emotional, and behavioral. So could digital technology influence one or more of these three pillars? I guess you wouldn't think of your smartphone as a way to get more nature or to access nature, but there's actually more and more studies on the subject on how we can connect to nature through digital technology. So digital technology gives us access to what is called digital nature or virtual nature. As little scale and all here with their enable, reconnect, and augment expression say, virtual nature may be a beneficial addition to actual nature, so enable, help people reconnect with the real natural world, reconnect, and boost human-nature interactions, augment. And we are doing it anyway. We are already doing it. So you may not realize it, but you're probably already using your smartphone to get access to digital nature. Because digital nature can come in different shapes and forms. For instance, have you ever watched a video of kittens or otters on Instagram? Really, I mean, you're doing a good thing for your ecological identity just doing this. Or is your desktop background an image of nature, like the beach, forest, mountain, anything? Have you ever watched a nature documentary on Netflix? Or have you ever read an article on, I don't know, environmental conservation online? I think a lot of us have done that already. All these examples are digital nature. So digital nature includes visual, auditive, and textual components related to natural environment that can be accessed online. More precisely, a study published in 2021 proposed the following typology of digital visual media formats with contents of nature. So that would include static images like digital photographs, graphics, short-form videos, TikTok, YouTube, music videos, long-form videos, documentaries or movies, and live videos like webcam, live streams, and as well as apps like ID guides, wildlife recording, educational apps related to the environment. Another example of the possibility offered by digital technology is augmented reality. I'm talking about augmented reality because that's actually the subject I'm working on now at the RCC. So, in short, AR. AR is an interactive technology that supplements the real world with virtual objects that appear to coexist in the same place as the real world. If you ever used Snapchat filters or things like that, you know what AR is. You can basically see your surroundings, and on your screen you can add digital items. Or if ever anybody in the place in this room has played to Pokemon Go, that's AR. So AR can be very interesting because it has immersive properties, and the fact that AR can be immersive and make you feel like you are in the virtual world that you're watching is very important for your ecological identity. So if we take this to nature, like AR nature, compared to digital 2D media, AR can deliver vivid audiovisual representations of nature, and it can create the illusion of being transported into a virtual natural environment. As a result, that sense of immersion induces an intense sense of what we call presence. Presence is like feeling like the virtual thing you're seeing is real. You're basically giving your own presence to the virtuality of the environment, and you are the one thing making it real, actually, through your feelings. And And the importance of that sense of presence is that it's been linked by a lot of studies to increase nature connectedness or ecological identity and increase pro-environmental behaviors. So to what extent does digital technology and digital nature impact ecological identity? So let's take a concrete example. If you remember what I explained earlier about the 3 pillars of the ecological identity, the cognitive, emotional, and behavioral components, these 3 pillars could be impacted by digital technology or augmented reality. So a very concrete example, in 2021, Snapchat partnered with the Great Barrier Reef Foundation to launch a global campaign to help protect the reef from climate change. Millions of global Snapchat users were encouraged to use Snapchat to share an environmental pledge via what is called the water segmentation lens. So once users swipe up on the lens, they can aim their phone at a body of water, and it will show a reconstruction of the reef and its ongoing decline under climate change. And for those who don't have an access to water, the tool also works as an AR display. So by swiping, users are able to help bring the reef back to life, both virtually and in reality, because every swipe equals 1 coral planted by the Great Barrier Reef Foundation. So if you think about it, how would that kind of AR app influence or impact ecological identity and its 3 dimensions? In other words, could exposure to AR representation of the reef influence our cognitive understanding and our emotional connection to the reef? And could it also influence our behaviors towards the ocean? The Snapchat lens can overlay information about marine life, coral formations, and conservation efforts onto real-world surroundings. So the dynamic and interactive approach can foster a sense of wonder, curiosity about the reef, which may nurture the pillars of ecological identity. The fact that the knowledge about reef ecosystem provided by the technology and the knowledge on climate change as well, this knowledge can support the cognitive dimension of ecological identity, and it can also work on the emotional dimension by fostering empathy for the reef, because through the app you can see the damage that's been done to the reef because of climate change, which may make you feel some emotions, sadness or grief or anger or whatever towards the reef, for the reef. And because the app has been conceived, designed to because basically it offers the possibility for users to be part of an online community and to plant actual corals once you use it. So that's technically count as a pro-environmental behavior. So that's where I'm at in my reflection about the interactions between nature identity and digital technology. And I am currently considering the limitations of digital technology to reconnect us to nature. Because while digital technology offers clear advantages, there's a lot of studies on that. it also poses several problems. So questions for future research. Maybe the first question, maybe you've thought about that earlier, like way when we started the presentation. I mean, could digital nature replace actual nature? That would be scary, I guess. Another question is, what about the environmental cost of digital technology? Because I find it very interesting that if digital technology can help us get back in touch with nature, at the same time, every time we use it, it impacts the planet and the environment negatively. To answer the first question, although it's not like a rigid answer, I mean, it's just open for discussion. Could digital nature replace real nature? Most studies on the subject always end their conclusion by saying digital nature is to be seen as not a substitute to real nature, but as a supplement, as a complement, as a way to boost an already existing connection to nature. So it should be a beneficial addition to actual nature. And in regard to ecological identity, digital technology also has some limitation because, once again, when you think about the three pillars, cognitive, emotional, behavioral, the behavior, even all three pillars, but most obviously the behavioral one, relate to the human body. Digital technology, and especially when it's immersive, like with AR, has that kind of magical thing that you kind of forget yourself. You dive in your screen, you get online, you lose track of time, and usually you're immobile, sitting or at your desk, and you forget your body as well. So that it creates kind of a disconnect between mind and body. And there already are some studies on this subject, talking about digital depersonalization. For instance, a study published in 2022 by Sionica et al. Defines digital depersonalization as a dissociative experience characterized by distressing feelings of being detached or estranged from oneself and body and or the world. After having spent time on light, basically you can experience that kind of feeling like you're, I don't know, detached from yourself somehow. So that would be a problem to sustain a healthy ecological identity. About the second question, the environmental cost of digital technology. This is a real problem because we are evolving toward an even more connected society. And we are still trying to make sense on how to use digital technology properly rather than be used by it. And we're not there yet, I guess. So yeah, could this really be a good tool for the human-nature relationship? One question that feels very important to me for my next research, because I would like to interview people in the context of AR and have them basically have an AR experience of the reef and then see how it impacts their ecological identity. So an important question, I think, would be to ask those persons as well. I mean, if the AR experience improves their ecological identity, could the fact also of knowing that digital technology basically destroys the planet, could that lessen the benefits and the positive impact of the AR nature experience? That's it. Thank you.